let's dive into a world where extreme wealth and criminal genius just collide. We're not talking about street crime here. No, this is about the kind of fraud that happens in penthouse boardrooms and at fancy charity events, carried out by the very people you'd never suspect. Way back in 1939, a sociologist named Edwin Sutherland finally gave this a name: white-collar crime. And here's the key: these are crimes of deceit, not desperation. You know, these are the folks who already have everything, but they still want more. And they use their status, their charm, as their most powerful weapons. And that, right there, is the central idea for our whole journey today. The luxury lifestyle, the private jet, the exclusive parties, that whole gilded cage, it isn't just the prize at the end of the crime. It's actually the most important tool for pulling it off in the first place. I mean, think about it, right? When you project this image of incredible success, it creates its own reality. It gives off this aura of legitimacy that just completely shuts down our natural skepticism. It's the perfect bait to lure the next round of victims right into the trap. So, to really get how this all works, we've got to rewind the clock. We're going back to where the modern blueprint for this stuff was written: America's Gilded Age. This was the time of the infamous robber barons. What you had back then was just a perfect storm for exploitation. Industry was exploding, but there were almost no rules. Corruption was everywhere. The government had a total hands-off approach, and it meant that powerful men, guys like Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, could literally write their own rules and invent brand new ways to get filthy rich. And one of their all-time favorite plays, the pump and dump. It's a classic stock manipulation trick they pretty much perfected. They'd artificially drive up a stock's value, create all this hype to suck in regular investors, and then boom, they'd sell off all their shares at once, causing the price to crash and wiping everybody else out. Now, if you want the perfect example of a Gilded Age scandal, you gotta look at Credit Mobilier. A bunch of insiders from the Union Pacific Railroad literally created a fake construction company. Why? So they could overcharge the government for building the Transcontinental Railroad. And to keep the money flowing, they bribed powerful politicians, all the way up to the vice president, with shares in their phony company. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass in corruption. All right, so as we move into the 20th century, the game starts to change. The fraud becomes less about just brute economic force and more about a performance. A captivating story and a whole lot of charisma become the deadliest weapons in the arsenal. And here you can see the ultimate confidence game in its original form versus its perfected version. In 1920, you've got Charles Ponzi promising an absolutely insane 50% return based on a story about postal coupons. Flash forward a few decades, and you have Wall Street legend Bernie Madoff running the exact same playbook, but on an industrial scale. His story was a complex, jargon-filled options strategy, and his promised returns were a steady, totally believable 10–12% a year. The core con? Identical. The scale? Just terrifyingly different. $65 billion. Just let that number sink in. That was the size of Madoff's fraud. It is, to this day, the largest Ponzi scheme in history. A number so huge it's almost meaningless. And he didn't just defraud wealthy individuals, he wiped out charities, universities, and entire family foundations. You know, the fact that Madoff wasn't caught, despite years of credible people sounding the alarm, was just a catastrophic failure of the system. His collapse led directly to the Dodd-Frank Act, the single biggest financial reform since the Great Depression. It created a powerful whistleblower program, it forced secretive funds out into the light, and it tightened up audits. Basically, the government was scrambling to patch the massive holes Madoff had just blown wide open. Now, Madoff might have been the biggest, but he was far from the only one playing the game. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have given us a whole new gallery of rogues, each one adapting the old playbook for a brand new era. You've probably heard of Jordan Belfort, right? The Wolf of Wall Street. His firm basically took that old Gilded Age pump and dump scheme and cranked it up to 11 for a new generation. They used these high-pressure boiler rooms to sell worthless stock, all to fund a lifestyle of pure excess that ended up costing investors more than $200 million. And then the fraud goes global. Joe Low represents a totally different level of the game. Instead of just ripping off private investors, he allegedly masterminded the theft of $4.5 billion from his own country's sovereign wealth fund. He then laundered that cash through the global financial system, buying super yachts, priceless art, and a whole lot of influence in Hollywood. And finally, we get to Anna Sorokin, or Anna Delvey. And she proved you don't even need to manipulate stocks if you can just manipulate your own identity. By inventing this whole persona of a German heiress, she literally used her fake social status as collateral to defraud New York's elite, banks, and friends. Her story showed just how vulnerable our systems are to nothing more than a confident performance. And that shift, from faking assets to faking identity, brings us right to the cutting edge of fraud. We're talking about a new frontier where tech like cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence is creating dangers we're only just starting to wrap our heads around. One of the most vicious new scams out there is called pig butchering. It's absolutely brutal. Scammers use things like dating apps or social media to build deep, personal, trusting relationships over weeks, sometimes months. Then, once that trust is solid, they convince the victim to invest their entire life savings into a fake crypto platform. And then, they just disappear. It's a devastating mix of emotional manipulation and modern financial tech. And the threat from AI? It's not a what if anymore, it's a what now. Just look at this. Last year alone, fraud attempts using deepfake technology shot up by 700%. 700%! That is not an evolution, that is a revolution in the ability to commit crime. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, criminals are already using AI to get past bank security with fake selfies. They're cloning the voices of CEOs to trick finance departments into wiring money. They're even selling complete synthetic, deepfake identities on the dark web as fraud as a service. Deception is now automated, and it is scalable. So when you step back and look at this entire history, it's really hard not to see it as a constant, maybe even an unwinnable arms race. It's the fraudsters on one side, and the regulators who are always one step behind, trying desperately to catch up. I mean, just look at the pattern here. The credit mobilier scandal leads to more scrutiny. Charles Ponzi leads to new uses of mail fraud laws. Jordan Belfort, he gets the Penny Stock Reform Act, and Madoff, of course, gives us Dodd-Frank. Every single time, a massive fraud forces a reactive legal patch to close the exact loophole the criminal just finished exploiting. And this reveals the fundamental dynamic of it all. Fraudsters are society's most ruthless early adopters. They are always the first ones to find the cracks in any new technology, any new financial tool, any new social platform, and they weaponize it long before the law even has a clue what's going on. Which leaves us with a final and, honestly, a pretty unsettling question. The entire history of this kind of fraud has been an attack on our trust. But now, the technology exists to fake not just a document or a story, but reality itself. In a world of perfect deepfakes, what does it even mean to trust what you see or what you hear? Is seeing still believing?